Good afternoon and welcome to the April 19th meeting of Glendale Housing Authority. May we have roll call, please?
Authority members: Devine.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Kelly. Garpetian.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Razian.
Here.
Chair Sinanian.
Here. May we have the next item, please?
Report for this agenda is that it was posted, this is a meeting for April 19, 2016. Regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, April 14, 2016 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Next item is approval of minutes.
We have.
I'll move for A.
Second.
Do we need to take roll on this already?
Unless there's any
No. So
abstentions or objections.
any abstentions or objections? None. The minutes are approved as submitted. Next item, please.
Next item is oral communications. No cards were submitted for oral communications, although we'll have cards for other items.
Okay. Next item, business agenda.
6A is Director of Community Development regarding discussion regarding tenant selection process for the affordable housing project at 121 North Kenwood. A1 is a motion to note and file, provide directions to staff.
Yes.
Yes, sir. All right. With the ACE 121 project completion fast approaching, Council last week had asked for a refresher on the criteria for residency for this affordable housing development. So we'll have Phil give you that update from where we were in July of 2014, and then take any council direction from there. Phil?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Housing Authority, as Mr. Ochoa stated, we are getting ready now. We're at a place where we need to start our selection process for the housing project that we did with the YMCA. And if you could bring the presentation for me there, Artie. The project was proposed as an artist colony or an art project. It has obtained tax credits as a family/artist project, and that's what we used to construct the project. We had three different areas that we wanted to review with you. What is the definition of an artist? What is the priority? Because if you remember, you asked for a local preference. And then finally, how is somebody selected? So the artist definition is pretty broad. In the areas skilled in any fine arts, these are people that are drawing, painting, creative imaginary works, choreography, music composition, photography. Functional art, this would be the production of jewelry, rugs, furniture, theater artists. Then we also have a section that gets a whole bunch of behind-the-scenes artists. For instance, a teacher that teaches art in one of our Glendale schools would be considered an artist under this definition. The project is an affordable housing project. We're using the California tax credit allocation limits. These are the income limits. So for somebody that is 30% of the area median income, one person, they cannot make more than $17,430, and it goes across. In parentheses are the maximum number of units that we think in any one of those sections. So we believe that this will be somewhat the spread. Down at the bottom there, we also have a minimum amount that somebody can make. That's 2 times their rent over a 1-year period. So if their rent was $500, they would have to make $12,000 a year to be able to qualify in the income limits. So back in February of 2014, the Council, the Housing Authority, really had wanted to make this a local project and give some local preference to artists. In working with fair housing laws, what we landed on was somebody who lived or worked, and it would be live or work in Glendale, that would be the local preference. To just do live would be really stretching the bounds and probably violating those regulations, those parameters.
What are those regulations?
Of fair housing.
So what can we have some specifics as to what those regulations are, specifically language?
Sure. So, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibits discrimination in housing, both intentional discrimination and the application of neutral policies, which will have a disparate impact on protected classes. And so in the affordable housing context, what that means is a housing preference, for example, a geographic preference or residence-only restriction could be subject to challenge on the grounds that although it's neutral on its face, it might have a disparate impact on particular, for example, racial ethnic groups. So, for example, in a community like Glendale, with a certain demographic that's surrounded by a much larger metropolitan Los Angeles area with some different demographics, a neutral policy on its face could still be deemed to have a discriminatory or disparate impact. And so, in this context, what most agencies do in the area of local preference is to, as Mr. Lansfame explained, is to diversify that pool by making it not only live in Glendale or live in that particular community, but live or work in the community, so that you're serving the goal of trying to create some local preference while at the same time having a more diverse pool of applicants. And so that's generally the way that the preference has been balanced with the needs to comply with the fair housing laws. So that's essentially why the recommendation was to do it as Mr. Lansfame is laying out to you here this afternoon.
Okay, let's continue and then we'll get back to that.
So back in July, noting the council's preference, we came up with this kind of hierarchy of selection. So if you were a tenant in the existing project, income qualifying artist household, you would be at the top of the list. We did not have any of those. They have all been relocated to other areas, so that really doesn't come into play here. The next was somebody that lived and worked and performed in Glendale. I think, Mr. Sananian, last week you had mentioned, gee, there's a problem with creates or performs. How do we really know what that is? How do we really demonstrate that? That staff had that same problem some time back. And so what I'm giving you what the preference was in 14, we've taken that out. And so you'll see that as we convert these preferences to points, you'll see where that happens. The next was if you lived or worked in Glendale, taking out the creates and performs. Then if you met one of those criteria, lived or worked, which basically the same as the one above. Then there would be an income qualifying artist household. That could be from anywhere, not the local preference. Then we go back to a local preference, any income qualifying household that lives and works, then those who live or work, and then finally, any income qualifying household from anywhere. So taking those preferences that you approved in July, and now we're at a place where we actually need to apply them, what we've done is we've created a point system. So if you're an artist, you get 2 points. If you live in Glendale, you get 1 point. If you work in Glendale, you get 1 point. So the maximum, and that corresponds to the preference list, the maximum you could get is 4 points. Once we exhaust those applications, then we still want to have a preference, a local preference, so artist, and then you either live or you work. Those are 3 points. Then we have the 2-point category where if you're an artist, you don't live or work in Glendale, but you get 2 points for being an artist. If you live and work in Glendale, you also get 2 points. So you're on an equal footing there.
But you don't have to be an artist.
But you do not have to be an artist.
Okay.
And then finally, if you live in Glendale or you work in Glendale, 1 point. So this is how we assign points. We have a selection committee. Again, this was something that the Housing Authority looked at in July. We wanted somebody from our Library, Arts, and Culture staff. The YMCA is our partner. Meta, the developer. Engage is the service provider. And then a local artist. The Arts Commission has selected Ms. Duro-Venetian.
Sorry, one quick question.
Engage, what kind of a service are they providing? Engage, what kind of a service are they providing?
Engage is providing services, Peter, Mike, some more detail, but Engage is providing services to those low-income families in the areas of art and management, case management, and things that we typically would provide in an affordable housing project.
Okay, let's continue. Thank you.
Once we get all the applications that come in, the developer will, property manager, they will screen those for income eligibility. So we have those that you saw on the chart. They'll make sure that people are income qualified. Then they'll go in a pile. Those that are seeking the artist preference will then be sent to the selection committee. It's the selection committee's responsibility, those 5 people, to determine or confirm, yes, indeed, they are an artist over the definition that the Housing Authority has approved. Those that are confirmed as artists come back to the management company, and then they confirm if they live and or work in Glendale. Utility bill, pay stub, what have you. Those applicants with 4 points are then put into a lottery, and we'll do that how we've done with all of our others, a completely random lottery, and then we'll pick. There's 69 units here, so we'll pick enough for those 69 and then a good-sized waiting list, because some of them will fall out for one reason or another. If after we get through all of those with 4 points, we still have some left, we'll go to those with 3 points and so on to 2 points and 1 point, so that we're staying with that priority schedule that you adopted and giving preference to those according to points earned. Those are the 3 areas. I'll invite Peter to come up and tell you a little bit about the promotion that we can do to get the word out on this, and he'll give you that detail now.
With regards to marketing of the applications, making the public aware, if we ask Phil, well then, real quickly on this is the rent scale.
Sorry, Peter.
And a couple of backup slides. I think one of the questions last week might have been what the rent range would be. For the 1 bedrooms, those rent ranges will be from as low as $544 to $933 on the high end for the 1 beds. The 2 beds will range from my glasses on. 560 to $1,120, and the 3 bedrooms will range from $647 to $1,295. And remember, the units are set at different income categories, designations for the units, so that's why there is a range. So we thought it would give you the lowest range and the highest range. Some units might fall in between.
Can you go back for 1 second? Thank you.
Phil, can you do me a favor? In terms of the marketing, once the new round of flyers and dates for community meetings are reestablished, then we'll begin marketing. We expect that once we're given authorization from the Housing Authority and City Council to proceed, about 2 weeks to 3 weeks to be able to gear back up again. After that, we plan to do marketing in a number of different ways. We plan a direct mailer to our affordable housing interest list. If you recall, some 3 years ago, we conducted a series of community forums on affordable housing. Out of those community meetings, we had a desire to be kept on, of residents wanting to be kept on an interest list, not necessarily for Section 8, but for all housing opportunities that would be affordable in the community. We've been doing that for the last 3 years. Currently have about 10,000 households on that affordable housing interest list. And that affordable housing interest list is made up of people who have email access and are more comfortable receiving an email notice, and then others, typically the seniors, that don't have email access. So we'll be doing a split in that particular category of email blasts and direct mailings.
And is that just people who are currently living in Glendale or people from all around the region?
Oh, it's for people from all around. I would say predominantly 95% of those people on that list, though, tend to be Glendale addresses. We also intend to do a direct mailing to the developer's interest list. Ever since the grand opening or the groundbreaking of the project, they have had people call them asking to be notified of vacancy of this project and others. And so they have an interest list of about 400 households. We also plan to do a direct mailer to the people on the Section 8 waiting list, approximately 2,200 on that list. We also plan to do a direct mailer to social service, community service organizations in Glendale. We typically do that on all of our projects. We'll also do a mailer to some of the larger employers in town, Disney, DreamWorks, KBC, Art Institute in Montrose, Glendale Community College Art Department. We also typically then do our GTV6 PSA that we screen and run for the entire length of the marketing campaign. We will be posting it on the city's website, both on the main webpage and on the housing webpage. We will work with our PIO office to distribute it through the platform that they've specialized in, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, accounts like that, digital media that they use and the tools they have. We also have a number of listservs that the developer plans on doing blasts to, and those are listservs and membership roles for Glendale Arts, Library Arts and Culture Department, MONA, Society of Illustrators, the Actors Fund, Creative Tech Business List for Glendale. And we also plan on using any mailing lists that would be applicable to this project through the VJC with what they have, then also advertising in the Glendale News Press.
Can I ask a question? I noticed you have GCC Art Department. What about GUSD? There may be some teachers that would be interested in this as well. Speaking as a
added.
former teacher, they might need affordable housing. Okay.
It's a good point, and we'll add that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, one quick question.
Please, go ahead, Mr. Martin.
When are they going to send the notices out for the advertising?
It depends. What we have to do is schedule and secure meeting rooms for a new round of community meetings. The application process to some might be daunting. So what the developer has elected to do is they want to, during the application process, the outstanding process from beginning to end, a series of meetings that are strictly optional to be able to attend, to learn a little bit more about the application process and a little bit more about the section of the application that asks applicants to describe and quantify their art.
No, I understand, because my understanding is that the application period, it started last week.
No, we
hasn't started?
Based upon councils,
Okay.
we were within 5 minutes of being able to recall 10,000 mailings.
Okay, so it will be within that 1 month or 5 weeks window that the
We
mailers
expect
are
the
going
application process to start up again within 2.5 weeks
to start
from
in
whenever we
2.5
are given
weeks. Okay.
approval to proceed.
Okay, got it, because I was a little bit concerned. I thought it started last week, and
We
it's
were
gonna
too.
end in May 5th or May 10th, and then we don't have enough time to have the meetings and also send it out. Okay, good.
There were two,
Thank
but
you.
we barely made it and we called it off. We did have our first community meeting last week. We had a number of people somehow find out about it and attend. So we took their information down and let them know when it would be rescheduled.
Don't be surprised, because people watch GTV6.
Yes.
Are you finished with the report, Mr. Zovin?
I am. If I could, I'd like to go back to something that we weren't able to explain. I wasn't able to update Mr. Lanzafame on, but I do want to clarify for you. For the same reasons that Mr. Garcia mentioned with regards to fair housing and the whole fair housing issue with regards to residency and live in Glendale and the desire to be expansive, there is that same concern with regards to work in Glendale. And so on a federal level, work in Glendale would not prohibit an elderly or disabled person who is not working from being able to apply, because they don't want to leave out that population as well, simply because of their age or their disability. So I just wanted to clarify.
So they would qualify as
work.
Work.
Yes. Very similar, a uniform standard that HUD has.
Okay, so any individual who's elderly or has a disability would receive the same 2 points as if they had lived or worked in Glendale?
Correct. If they are senior or disabled living in Glendale, they'd be able to claim the Glendale Live and then Glendale Work as well.
What's
There's
the
that
threshold?
same fair housing
What's
issue.
the threshold for the income to qualify for this project?
Well, I believe Mr. Lanzafame talked
Yeah.
about that earlier.
So let's look at this a little more carefully.
Not 12,000, but 2 times.
What does this mean, Mr. Lanzafame? Can you decipher it, please?
I'm sorry.
Can you decipher what this chart says?
Sure. 60% of area median income is that if you're one family household, $34,860. So I apologize, I didn't do the math, but it's something 40% more than that. And then you go down. These are the limits that are established by the tax credit, California Tax Credit Agency. You'll sometimes hear them referred to as low, very low, and extremely low. Those are standards a little bit different that are set by the low moderate income housing that was formerly the redevelopment program. The limits are a little bit different, so we just look at percentage of area median income. So a family of 4 making less than $49,800 would qualify for this under that 60% AMI. Somebody that's making $26,910 would qualify for any one of these units. But for that top level, 60%, we only have 34 allocated to that very top level.
34 units allocated.
34 units, between 50 and 60% of that.
Okay.
Because those are making the higher salaries.
Making a higher salary.
That'd be like
less units.
$58,000 a year, so 60% of that is $34,860. So that would be the income limit for somebody, a one-person household, to take one of those 60% AMI units.
Okay, so going back to the issue of the preference points and how that's structured. When we voted on this, and I remember this distinctly, I believe Councilmember Najarian and I were not very happy with this project because we didn't understand why our very limited housing funds were going to be used for a project that we had no way of securing that at least a portion of it will go to Glendale residents. And I think that's how the idea of living in Glendale originated. I believe Councilmember Najarian was the one that originated it. So we came up, I don't think we came up with the structure. I think staff came up with the structure based on this Affordable Housing Act.
Go back one.
And the effect of it is actually to discriminate against those Glendalians, to discriminate against them directly, that possibly cannot afford, or possibly cannot show that they're employed in Glendale. In other words, if you live in Glendale and you're unemployed, that's the point of this project, to help people who are low income. If you live in Glendale but you're unemployed and you can't provide, 6 months of, who said it last week?
It's twice the rent times 12.
Twice the rent times 12. You can't show evidence that you're employed in making that amount of money, you're automatically docked a preference point. So a person who is an artist and who doesn't live in Glendale but happens to work here has a preference over those individuals. I think that's counterintuitive. That could not have been our intent. It couldn't have been.
I think when you watch the video and you look and consider what the governing authority is in terms of setting what those precedents are, what you're describing is on one end of one side of the scale, and on the other side of the scale is the desire to make sure that folks who don't live here now have the ability to live here. Because if you take, for example, African American population, we have an extraordinarily small African American population. If we said that the preference would tilt towards living here versus living here or working here, when you put all of those folks who are likely, if that's the preference, put them all into the hopper and then take the random lottery, you're almost assured to not have, just by the sheer numbers and odds of who lives here today and who doesn't live here today, you're almost sure to not have a representation of that larger region. And that's the other half of the scale. So it is a balance. And so I don't
can't you extend that argument and say that by giving 2 preference points for an artist, by making this an artist colony, you're automatically excluding vast numbers of human beings of different nationalities, of different backgrounds, who are not artists, and therefore that's discriminatory. It's bad.
Not necessarily. I think if the council were to look and you reflect back on how the project came to fruition, it's a project that is immediately adjacent to the arts and culture community arts and culture district, and the idea was to have a housing development, if it's going to be an affordable housing development, that would contribute towards that lifestyle, towards that scene, because there are all kinds of folks who are of affordable income, up to and including artists. So that's how we got to the preference point for artists. At this point, I don't know that we could go back and change that preference, because the project received tax credits as an artist project.
Okay.
Yes,
well,
Mr.
Well, let me make a couple questions, make a couple points. So the argument that there are those living outside of Glendale who would otherwise not be able to apply in Glendale is based on the presumption that Glendale housing is in itself exclusionary. And unless we've had cases against us, unless we've had complaints that for some reason the Glendale housing suppliers are excluding and discriminating against ethnic groups or gender or nationality or whatever, then the argument doesn't make sense.
Let me, if I could, if you want me to respond after.
Well, that's one point.
Again,
I mean, why are we assuming that we're excluding?
We're not. What I'm saying is that the way that the regulatory agencies and the courts have interpreted the Fair Housing Act is, if you have a policy which is neutral on its face, just like a preference, if that has the potential to have a disparate impact upon any protected class, then that you don't need to prove.
Give me an example. Give me an example that would fit into
I'll give you an example. Sure. There is a case, United States Supreme Court case from last year. I forget the name of it. But the challenge was that you had a particular housing policy that was concentrating the affordable housing in a particular area, multifamily area of that city, which was predominantly housed the African American community in that particular community. And so the challenge was that the policies established to put the housing in that particular area was, even though it was neutral on its face, was discriminatory, had a disparate impact. And I think when we look at this from a legal perspective on the disparate impact claim, you don't have to show discrimination. You don't have to show past actions by landlords or policies. All you have to show is the policy might have a disparate impact on a particular community.
Give me an example, though.
I just did.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about location, though. I mean, you were talking about location, and you were saying that it would give greater preference to the African American. Let me give you the starkest example. Let's say, for example, the city of Glendale was 100% white, and we had a policy that you got a preference above anything else, that you had to be a Glendale resident to take one of these units. The disparate impact would be is that if you were not white, then you couldn't get a unit because you were not white and you were not entitled to that point. That's a disparate impact, even though on its face, it's not discriminatory because it's just saying you got to live in Glendale. I'm just using that as an example. Okay,
so
but in Glendale, I mean, if you were to defend us in this, if we were to say remove the point for those that work in Glendale, and you were to defend us, and I hope you would, wouldn't you say that Glendale is a multicultural city with members of all ethnicities and races and genders and sexual preferences and national origins and all the other protected classes? I mean, wouldn't you say that? Because that's what I would say. We're a very multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic community. So I'm not sure what someone would say to that. I mean,
well, I think when you look at our demographics, while we are very diverse, we don't have the same demographics of the surrounding Los Angeles County. And so I would think, and Mr. Cho referred to the example of, for example, African Americans or Latinos. And that's the reason why, generally speaking, these preferences, if you're going to use them, you broaden the pool of folks that might be eligible for them. And I think to the earlier point, just so we know where we started, the prior, not this particular graph, but the prior one, we brought that to the Housing Authority in July, and all the staff did was convert that into the points. So that we talked about live in Glendale being the same as work in Glendale, and then live and work in Glendale being giving a higher order of preference than the other two.
Do we know what the workup is of the employees that work in Glendale?
Do I know specifically?
I mean,
no,
do we know? I mean, the presumption is that those that work in Glendale also reflect the broader Los Angeles, or whatever area you're looking at.
Certainly, and that's, as a general rule, that's true.
But here's the fundamental problem. If you're working, you have a salary, which means that, and assuming you're an artist, you're automatically guaranteed those 3 points. If you're an artist living in Glendale and you're not working, that's it. You lose that point automatically. So this is rigged against, I'm not saying rig it for those who are in Glendale. This is rigged against those who live in Glendale. The way it's structured now is rigged.
That way. You're getting the same amount of points.
If you're working in Glendale, you're working in Glendale. You're working, you're making a salary, means that, and assuming, of course, for all of them, assuming you're an artist, you're an artist and you're working in Glendale, you're automatically guaranteed those 3 points. But if you're living in Glendale, but you're an economically challenged individual or family, don't have work, you're looking for work, you can't prove that you have work, you're automatically going to be docked that 1 point, that one preference.
But you still get the 1 point. You still get the 3 points.
Yeah, so but anyone who's working in Glendale will have an advantage over you. A 1 point advantage.
If you look on, look at number 2 preference. So if you are working in Glendale, you're on the right-hand side in that number 2 preference band. You get 3 points. Right. If you're an artist and you work here, but you can't, you're looking for work, you live here, but you can't find work, you're looking for work, you can't prove you work, you still get 3 points. So you're on the same footing as the person that is an artist and works here. Now, you'll both go into a lottery and somebody's going to get picked, but you would maintain the same equal footing as somebody that works here. You would never drop below if you live here. The only time that would happen is if you are not an artist and you live here, even if you live and work here, and you're not an artist, then you would get 2 points, you would drop below. But that's the only instance.
Well, and even then, if you're an artist, you get 2 points, but if you live and work here, you get 2 points. So you don't have to be an artist. You can just live and work here, and you're still in the pool.
Okay. Mr. Najarian?
Don't we use Glendale residency as a preference point in other housing?
I'd have to defer to Mrs.
Section 8.
Isn't that in our Section
we don't
8?
because of the HUD requirements.
Exactly. Often we do not, because most of our projects have mixed funding sources, of which one of them tends to be HUD at the federal level.
So you may recall that when we first came, we had home funds in this project, and we could not give a residential preference. Council directed that we not, to our best of our ability, not use home funds. We restructured the financing so we didn't use home funds, and thus you see a preference for a local preference. That was not part of the original project because we were using federal money. So here you actually have a local preference.
And that's how I thought we solved this problem. But you're saying that we can't eliminate the work in Glendale preference?
I think if you, to the extent as we've endeavored to explain, if you say that the folks that live here get preference above and beyond anybody else, it is effectively a self-fulfilling prophecy of who will continue to live here. And I think that's the balance that we have to adjust to with respect to the fair housing laws. Whether or not we use home funds, we do have to still exist within that context.
The only affordable housing projects to date that allow a Glendale preference have been the density bonus projects, which is a state program that comes at no cost to the housing authority for developers to take advantage of. That provides a live or work preference for those density bonus units.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So what if we have a total of 5 preference points? 2 for an artist, 2 for a resident of Glendale, 1 for work in Glendale. Can we do that?
It's how much risk you want to take, sir. I mean, my opinion has been this is the way to do it. This is what legal professionals who deal with affordable housing and fair housing issues constantly to make that balance. Because the law is not clear, and frankly, you'll probably get some folks to say it's not fair that you have a live or work or live and work requirement. So we're trying to balance the equities of compliance with fair housing law as well as trying to create a balance for residents as well.
But aren't we discriminating against those people who are talent challenged, people who aren't that don't have that certain je ne sais quoi that the artists have, that creativity, that certain element? And let's not cast that under the bus here.
I think the council had a very robust dialogue about that a year and a half ago, and that's how the definition got to be as relatively broad as what it is. I mean, this arguably is workforce housing for the entertainment industry that exists in a large way here in town, let alone in the San Fernando Valley. I mean, because you can work in the industry and
But Mr. Orchard, how do I go to my constituents, the people that voted for me, who said that they are in such dire need of housing that they are often leaving Glendale. They're forced to leave their communities and their schools, and tell them with a straight face that I'm giving them the same shot at an affordable housing project in Glendale as someone who lives in some other part of the county but happens to have some job, whether it's full-time or part-time, in the city of Glendale. I can't, with a straight face, say that to my constituents. Whether it's against housing, let the Department of Justice sue us for that. But I can't do that, because that's why I was put into this position, by telling the residents that I'm going to fight for them and fight for their housing. For their housing, not the folks in L.A. who never cast a vote or who maybe clock in and clock out from 9 to 5. I mean, I personally have a conscious problem with that. I don't know about anybody else. That's why I raised such a big stink of this a year and a half ago, and I thought we had solved the problem.
We thought so too.
We thought so too.
Well, that's just where I'm at, and maybe I'm being unfair to those people that work in Glendale, that want to live in Glendale, but my duty is to the residents of Glendale.
I understand the fair housing issues aside, when we came to you in June of 2015, the balance was struck, so this was going to be a housing project geared towards artists, and that was the proposal that the developers submitted to TCAC for its award. So,
Mr. Majarian, I just to clarify, back in February, we did not have any preference, and much like we do many of our other projects, we take comers from anywhere, put them into the lottery. It was at that time that the council, the authority, said, we want to have a local preference. And you're right. You said, how do I not serve the people that are here in this project? And that's when we went and restructured the funding. We took out the federal funding and we replaced it with, and the best we could do, balancing the Fair Housing Acts, was to come up with live or work, as a preference. And that was what we had presented, and I had thought was acceptable to the Housing Authority to say, if that's the best we can do, at least we're getting Glendale residents and those that are contributing to our community by working here, whether they be a teacher, a technician, or some other type of artist.
Yes, Ms.
So Habitat for Humanity projects, do they have a local residency requirement or preference?
Habitat project?
Habitat for Humanity projects that we've done, I think we're doing number 9, or we just finished number 9. Do those have a local requirement or local preference for people in Glendale?
They look to provide that consideration, but that's not been the case in every unit they have sold, no.
And then what about all the other affordable housing projects? So the 3 that are down in South Glendale that were done in the last few years, do those have a local?
Cypress Senior Living, that project did not have a local preference.
What about the rest? What about Fifth and
Veterans
Sonora?
Village, other than the veterans preference that was provided, the remaining non-veterans, there was no preference for Glendale
Fifth and
versus
Sonora,
outside
will that have a local preference, or we don't know yet?
We don't know yet.
But if it takes state or federal money, it cannot?
Typically, it cannot, correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a little confused as to why Mr. Najarian's raising this now, because every other project that he's voted on has not had a local preference. And to take the money, the funding that we take from the federal government and the state government, we can't have a local preference. And the reason is because the taxpayers in the other areas paid for these projects, not just the Glendale residents. If we had a project that was purely Glendale taxpayer money, or that we paid for out of the general fund, I'm assuming that we could do that. But if we accept money that's being paid for by taxpayers around the state, then they have a reasonable expectation that they're going to have some benefit as well, I would assume. And in terms of these fair housing laws, whether or not we get sued over it, I don't know why the council would be in a hurry to break federal law, even morally, to say that we don't want to have the diversity of the surrounding greater Los Angeles area, that we're somehow afraid of that, I think is really the wrong signal to be sending. And as we see from our other housing projects that do not have a local preference, we tend to get a lot of Glendale applicants. Mr. Zovak is nodding. He told us that out of the 10,000 or so, 8,000 residents that are on the list, that he believes that 95% of those people are already people that are living in Glendale. So I don't think that I think this is I don't think that there's a huge issue here, and I have a sense that we'll get a lot of people who are living or working in the community. I also want to remind the council, the Housing Authority, for those that weren't here, that this project, we are told, got funding at a time when there were very few grants being given out and a lot of applications, that it got funding because it was the only one that was a creative community / artist project. And the state board that was giving out the funding thought that was very exciting, especially in an area where you can make the argument that this is workforce housing, because so many of our residents here work in the entertainment or other creative industries. And the YMCA was excited about this project because they felt that given the mostly young people that they service, that having artists on hand to work with those young people and mentor them about art and working in the creative industry would be very helpful and healthy for those young people. So there's a lot of reasons why this is a great project. I'm sorry that we didn't issue that email and get this out to the community and get people applying. I don't understand why we're sitting here after having discussed this ad nauseum just a year and a half ago. I think we should go ahead with these preferences, move ahead and get people into these units as quickly as we can. And I know it's already looking like a beautiful project, and I know that it's going to be something very special that's very beneficial to our community. And I'm looking forward to seeing it occupied.
Yes, Ms. Devine.
Well, that was my question. I was going to ask Mr. Zovak how many residents were selected for Veterans Village. And, of course, Councilmember Friedman got that answer for me.
I'm sorry, what was the answer?
The answer was not many.
Not many, exactly. Because from what I understand, we had to go outside and try very, very hard to fill those apartments with mostly people that had nothing to do with Glendale, which is fine. I mean, but that's not the best example to use.
Right. Well, but my argument was the fact that a lot of our low-income housing is not does not accommodate those of us, the residents of our city. I wasn't here when this was discussed. However, I looked over the specifics, and it really, I think our goal here is to make sure that it's fair. And I look at the point system, and it looks fair to me. And it's also to make sure that that we get these tenants in there without any delay. So that's kind of like my position right now. I'm not sure how you want to. I don't know if eliminating those that work here is discriminatory according to federal law. Would that be considered discriminatory if we?
Again, I think and I'm not trying to say it is. That wasn't my intent. What I'm trying to say is the law is very unsettled. You have a lot of advocacy groups that oppose the use of preferences. And so to the extent that we're trying to comply with law and show that we're complying with the law, our recommendation has been to balance that out and provide additional preference points so that you get a broader pool, not just Glendale residents.
Mr. Carpentier?
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of questions from staff. Mr. Zovak, if you don't mind. So we did not use any home funds just to be able to have preference point. Am I correct?
To address concerns expressed previously by the Housing Authority, yes.
Okay. And we said that we had 9% tax credit loans. We applied for 9% tax credit, and this application was filed based on family and art program. Am I correct? It's family and art. It's not art only.
Correct.
Okay. And what are the unit mixes in this project? How many 3 bedrooms?
Approximately 30%, 30, 30, 30, 33, 33, 30, evenly split between 1, 2s, and 3s.
Okay. Look, I don't know. I wasn't here when this vote was taken, and my decision would have been totally a different direction. But the vote was taken, and I went back and watched the both meetings on February. When was it? February. There's no date here. On the February and also July 8th meeting, just to educate myself as to what was discussed and how this vote was taken. To be honest with you, I was very disappointed in the way this vote was taken on an important project like this, because some of the council members, they had an appointment they had to leave, and some of the council members were cut off from making a comment because they wanted to take a vote. I'm not saying that the vote would have been any different if that wasn't the case, but it was not a fair way of taking this vote. And actually, one of the council members indicated that he was not for this project at all, but just because it was there and they're so far down the process, he was going to vote for it. So I don't know how this vote would have been gone if they had enough time to discuss the issues. One question I have is about the artist and the experience. If I'm how do I prove that I'm an artist? Based on my tax returns or based on my profession? Because if there's an artist that has 20 years of experience versus somebody who just started, are they in the same level? I just wanted to know. I'm not saying we should take sides one way or the other. Just want to know, how do we define, how do we distinguish between the people who are applying and how long they've been an artist? Maybe I just come in today and say, I started my art from yesterday. Do I qualify to file for this application or not?
Speaking of, well, keep in mind we have a committee, a selection committee, that is to evaluate those that claim the artist preference. There are a series of questions within the application that applicants must answer that the committee will help use to evaluate whether or not someone is an artist. I would say unless someone is a master artist, to say I've only been an artist for day one and I'm great and look at this, I think it'd be a little bit difficult to prove to a committee of 5 that they can qualify themselves as being an artist.
Okay.
Not to say it's impossible, but... And that'll be the challenge for the 5-member committee to evaluate and look at.
Yeah, I don't envy their position, let me put it that way, because it will be a tough process for them. Also, on the February 18th meeting, there were so many requests for clarification that they never got. One is the guideline for the committee. What is the guideline for the committee, that 5-member or 6-member committee that is going to decide who the artist is or not? I don't know what the guideline is. And also, excluding seniors from it, the age discrimination and disability. There were questions asked about it, but I'm not very clear on it. And I want to know if my colleagues recollect any of them or not. Maybe they can clarify it for me. But as far as this entire project goes, is it based on the tax credit that we received, the $20 million or what have you, the funding that we got to build this project? Does this have to be a 100% artist occupied project, or it could be structured differently?
It's been submitted and approved as a 100% artist preference project. And I'd like to clarify, you had mentioned seniors not being able to apply. That's not necessarily true. It's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. Because of this mix of 1, 2s, and 3s, it's typically called a family project. Nothing prevents a senior from applying for one of the 1-bedroom units, assuming they meet all of the other criteria to live there. So a senior is not prohibited from applying to this project.
Okay. Thank you for clarification, because it was not in my staff, and I'm just bringing up what was asked at that time, and I didn't have an answer for it. That's why I was raising that issue.
So about that question you asked the 5-member committee, how is that going to be formed?
It's in here, and I didn't have that in this report either. So it's in this PowerPoint that they presented. 5-member artist selection committee. It's library, arts, and culture staff, YMCA, MEDA, Engage, local artist community member, and that was by Arts and Culture Commission. That's Arlet, they're Hovanesian. I don't know what Mega Engage's role is in between, but we'll clarify that later. I don't know. But as far as this point, these are just questions that I'm raising right now. That this point process that we have, or the selection, two-part question. Can you give the Glendale resident 2 points and the artist 1 point, and if you work here 1 point, or can you give every category 1 point only and move forward from there on? So it would be a very fair assessment if you work here. Look, many people who work here, they chose not to live in Glendale. I know so many of them. They don't want to live in Glendale, but they work in Glendale, and vice versa. So these are questions that I have. Could that happen or not? If they all have 1 point, or if the Glendale resident would get 2 points, would that be against the?
The idea is to balance, and so I think having an equal point system on living and working is integral to the discussion of balance. So I mean, if you gave 1 point and a half point, or 2 points and 1 point, or 3 points and 2, it doesn't really. Our recommendation is predicated on the notion that we want to have that balance. That's our recommendation to you.
No, I understand. That's what I'm asking. If there's a 3-point, basically point system, 1 for artists, 1 for the resident who lives here, and 1 for a person who works here. So,
right. So again, the idea that the resident and the employee, person working here, have each 1 point, that speaks to that issue of balance. The 2 points for the artist speaks to the issue of the artist colony that was instrumental in getting the tax credits. So I don't know that in keeping with the recommendation we're giving you, we wouldn't recommend changing that.
I understand. I appreciate your point about keeping the balance, but I think my job is to look after the residents of Glendale, and keeping the balance between somebody who lives here or who doesn't, only works here, I don't think it's fair either. So I don't know how we're going to go about this at this point. I'm just letting everybody know that I watched both meetings, and I was not very. I was disappointed in the way this vote went at that time. Just the way that the vote was taken.
Certainly, the February meeting was rather raucous, and in some areas was cut short. We thought the July 8th meeting was much more, while thorough, was much calmer, for lack of a better term, because it seemed as though there was consensus in terms of the direction to give a local preference. There was a local preference given. If there's disagreement about what that local preference means or how it's parsed, that's basically where we are today.
If it was up to me, I would do the same way, that it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 as far as the units go. I would do 1/3 artists, 1/3 local residents, and 1/3 seniors, and keep it open to everybody. I'm not saying just make it a local issue, but every housing project that we have, every affordable housing that we have, people can come from all over the state and also the country and apply for it. Nobody's going to discriminate against that. But I think this is our very small funds that we have that we are putting into projects. We want to make sure that we serve our residents first. I'm a little bit of how can I put this in the right words? I feel that way because I may be wrong, but I feel that way because I want to make sure. I have meetings here with residents every single Tuesday. I meet with 5 to 7 people in the city that they are in a dire need of housing, and I don't know what to tell them. I mean, and if I have a project and I give everything to a certain professional, I mean, GTA was one of the things. I would open 1/3 to the GTA. Glendale Teachers Association. They have teachers who are in need of housing, so they can apply for it. And preference point, I would give them a preference point. I don't know. I think this is structured and done. I don't know if we can change anything or we cannot change anything. I don't know how my fellow council members.
You could give the money back. We were given a grant to make this 100% artist.
That's not what I'm hearing.
Project.
That's not what I'm hearing. This was filed for 9% tax credit, family and artist. It's not just artist. This is the way it's filed. And I don't have a problem for 100% for it to be artist. But I think I want to make it fair for the residents first. If that's being selfish, so be it. I don't know. I'm kind of late in the game into this thing, but I want to make sure that I personally do the right thing.
And I would just advise that you've done housing for seniors, restricted only to seniors. You've done housing restricted to special needs populations. You've done now housing for veterans on a couple of projects. You've done lots of different types of housing. The idea that there is a broad swath of people that need affordable housing. Some could be teachers. Some could be folks that work in the arts. And to the extent that this particular project was located adjacent to within the arts and entertainment district, that's, just to be real clear, that's how the discussion about an artist colony came to pass. You had a willing partner in the YMCA that had property that lent itself towards affordable housing, first and foremost, which is kind of rare, as you well know. And the discussion then became, if you're going to put affordable housing in the downtown, how do you develop some symbiosis between the folks that are living there and what happens in that district? I can tell you from personal experience that if you oftentimes will put senior low-income housing adjacent to the downtown core with the idea that those seniors who are mobility limited perhaps will somehow spark economic activity in the downtown core, and that's why you locate that particular population at that particular spot. It doesn't always work that well because many times they're on a restricted income. So the idea that we have all different types of folks who need affordable housing, younger folks generally are going to be spending that discretionary money as they get it. And will they contribute something? And will they contribute something if they're artists to boot, or at least working in the arts industry? All of those factors come to play in terms of this particular development. I think over now 4 meetings that the council and the housing authority has struggled with this question. I think you struggle in the sense that there's a dissatisfaction or even guilt on some accounts that we're doing housing for artists and the connotation of what an artist means. I mean, we heard it in that first meeting that the tattoo artist from Venice Beach or the struggling waiter who wants to be an actor, are they going to take the spot from somebody like a Don Mency who used to sit on this housing authority, who worked in the entertainment business, who still probably would qualify under that definition, yet isn't what creeps into your mind when you think of artist housing. To the extent this is an affordable housing development and it's adjacent to the arts and entertainment district, thus the connectivity to arts. That's all this project really ever was.
If I may, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
please, go ahead, Mr. Carpet.
One of the issues that was raised was the need. If there was a report that there was a need for affordable housing for artists, and there was no answer, and I never heard anything about that. Also, the developer had done a project in Long Beach, if I'm not mistaken, which is similar to this, and that's the only project that they knew and we know of that is structured this way. Am I correct?
I think there's one other one in addition to that one.
No, Burbank is for seniors.
Yeah, but the idea that I think they had 2, and the idea was that we had gone through that RFP process that led us in that direction.
No, I understand, but what I'm saying is a project similar to what we have today, only one was built, which is not for senior artists. It's only one, and I wanted to know how was their point system? How did they choose their applicants?
As I sit here, sir, I don't know.
Because it's the same developer, and they built similar project in another city, which has different demographics maybe. And I don't want to make this a race issue, please. I really don't want to go there because we're past that. So I wanted to know if there is a report, or if we know how did they choose their point system. How do they choose their applicants in Long Beach for their project? Because it's very similar to what we have here today.
I don't have that particular answer. Housing Authority member Garpetian, we're checking right now to see if we have that. I should say, I will clarify, though, that the developer had 2 projects, one that was already completed in Long Beach, another that I believe has since completed in San Pedro.
Okay, because I'm just telling you what I saw on the tape. I wasn't aware of the San Pedro one.
I just want to say I checked with the Meta, the representative from Meta. The one family project they did had no local preference, so they didn't have a need for this point system.
So they had the same point system?
No, they didn't
no
have
need.
a local preference.
Because they had no preference, they had
They
no
used the
need for
hot
points.
fund. I mean, the home funds. Maybe that's why they didn't have a local.
Possibly, but they didn't. Their city council didn't have the forthright attitude of our city council to say restructure the financing to give Glendale stakeholders a preference in this matter. This city council, this housing authority board did that. Said don't use the housing or the home funds. Find a different way so we can give a local preference to Glendale stakeholders. That's what you did, and that's what that council apparently did not do.
Okay. One last question, Mr. Chair. This point system that we have today, this was done after that February meeting?
After the July meeting.
The July meeting.
We had to convert.
The July meeting.
We had to convert the preference that the authority approved.
No, I understand. That's
that
what I'm
order
saying. So
into a point system.
So it was approved on the July meeting?
After the July meeting. So February meeting, council is still rather unsettled on the issue of local preference or not. The direction came back to staff. Staff comes back in July of 14, July of 14, and presents this restructured program with the idea that you would have preferences for locals, either resident or employee, and the implementation of that is represented in a point system. The idea that you would balance the live and the work.
Okay. Yeah, because on the February meeting, I didn't see any directions as to
council was still rather divided at that point, as I recollect.
So,
and I believe the only direction that we did get was how can we make this a local preference, which caused us to restructure the funds and come back with the best we could do in balancing those two things, live and work.
Just a point of clarification, and I think maybe this is where the confusion is. There's a difference between giving a local preference and giving a local preference point. What you're telling us is you designed it so there's a local preference point, which is different than saying there is a local preference. What I was assuming is that there was a local preference being an artist. It's different, and I think we all agree, that's different than saying there is a local preference point for being a resident.
I think you can take out a point system altogether, sir. I think you can take out points, don't even count points, and just say, is somebody an artist? Does somebody live in town? Does somebody work in town? If somebody verifiably works in town, lives in town, and is an artist, they have a higher degree of preferential treatment and don't even ascribe points to it. It's the same situation, just for purposes of the scorekeepers to be able to say, oh, this is this pool, this is that pool, this is the third pool. That's all.
And just to be clear, the July meeting, the order of preference was laid out. Artist, live in Glendale, work in Glendale, live in Glendale, work in Glendale. That sort of preference, and all that happened after that was assigning of points to that order of preference. So it was discussed if it wasn't especially laid out.
I think assigning the points are the issue, because you assign more points to artists than live in Glendale.
No, but what I'm trying to say is in July we explained that person who was an artist and also, for example, lived and worked in Glendale was going to have a higher priority than somebody who just lived and worked in Glendale. That was explained in the order of preference, and the only way for staff to implement it and the management company was to assign points to it so that you could rank them, and then they can go in the lottery by whatever point groupings they were in.
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Parazin.
I have a question. So the households who were relocated, so are they all coming back, no matter are they artist households or just the regular people?
They have all been relocated, permanently relocated, so they will be not re-entering the project.
Oh.
The people that live there. They were paid the relocation benefit, and they've been permanently relocated.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I know that at the beginning of the presentation, someone answered as to who Engage is. Can you do that again? Who's Engage?
So many of our projects have a developer who puts the project together, then they come in and have a separate social service provider that provides programming for the residents of the project. Seniors are given banking lessons, computer lessons, things along those lines. Families are giving lessons geared towards their children. Engage is the social service provider selected by Meta Housing to provide programming to the residents that are geared towards, and they specialize in arts.
Engage specializes in arts. They provide social services, yet they specialize in arts?
Yes.
How does that work?
So, for instance, the senior housing project in Burbank, that's an artist colony. So Engage works with the residents. They have a rock and roll band. They have open mic for comedy routines. They have a painting class that Engage will sit and organize residents to come on in and paint. They use their lobbies as showrooms for their paint work. Engage sits there and works with the residents to develop programming that achieves what it is the project is designed to achieve.
With the idea being that that type of social interaction is good for the seniors who occupy that property.
Okay.
You don't just build a colony or call it something without providing programming to help enhance it and facilitate it.
No, I get it.
It's very rare that it'll just grow naturally by itself and no one gets involved to organize residents to offer programming.
Right.
Remember, there's going to be 1,200 square foot public-private art gallery in the building. There are workstations on various floors in the building. There's a mess room. There's a media lab room. There are some hard and soft work rooms provided for the residents of the building. Someone needs to organize it. Someone needs to plan the programming for it. Engage does that.
I got it. I understand that someone has to do that, and it's important that someone does do that. What I'm trying to understand is why Meta, in essence, Meta is getting 2 members on that board for the selection. But I understand that these engaged people are somehow tangentially related to arts. So I guess that's the explanation. I'm not sure it's a good enough explanation. So, any more comments from my colleagues?
I
Yes,
want to make a comment. With this sort of, even if we remove the point system and just use the steps and the protocol that we have right now for choosing, we're not precluding any Glendale resident from applying for this housing. Everyone in Glendale that wants to and can apply. We're not telling anyone they can't apply. This is a long process. If we keep delaying this, then we'll not be getting residents into the build. I think this is fair. People that live in Glendale are included in every single category. They're all going to be thrown into the lottery in every single step of the way. And so I would like to see us go ahead today and approve this proposal.
Is that a motion?
No. I can move that.
Before we take a vote, I just want to understand the process. Can we make changes to this, to what's here before us, or not?
Yes. I mean,
We
the
can.
motion, just so you know, the motion that I heard from Housing Authority Member Devine is basically to note and file the report and keep the process the way it is.
No, I understand, but before we take a vote, I wanted to know if we can make any changes to what's before us today.
You can either vote the motion down, or you can make an amendment to her motion to direct staff, give staff further direction.
I think I wanted to see if there's any more discussions about the point system, and before we take a vote, can we do that or not?
Yeah, you can. There's just a motion on the floor, so you can have further discussion.
Okay.
Yes, Mr.
Well, I'd like to make a substitute motion, and that is to remove the 1-point preference for those that work in Glendale.
So instead of 2 points, give 1 point?
No.
No points for working.
No points for working in Glendale. Is there a second?
And to be clear, that's your opinion, though, is that might be counter to federal fair housing laws and might be seen and possibly is discriminatory on racial grounds and on other grounds, just to be clear of the possibility.
Well, he didn't say that, but let's hear what he has to say.
Well, I'm concerned about the risk, and
yes,
my
so
recommendation is to include the point for working in Glendale, along with 1 point for living in Glendale. That's a recommendation to strike the balance, as we've been talking about, between our policy preferences and fair housing laws.
If that is I would just also add that if that is the council's ultimate direction, or the Housing Authority Board's direction, then we would ask for that continuation, not approving anything today, because we still have to go back to Meta Housing, because possibly they don't want to be party to that kind of risk, if that risk is there, and or the YMCA. So just to be very clear.
So what? What are they going to do then? Aren't they building this thing?
They are building it, but there's an element of risk, and they may want to find a way to insulate themselves from that. My point is, I don't think that you today can assure that they will acquiesce entirely to that. They may, but they may want to say, well, hold on a second.
Well, then let me ask, do we have liquidated damages for breach of contract on this construction and a construction bond?
Whose breach?
Meta, if Meta refuses to go forward?
I don't think they have. I mean,
I would
I'm
hope
hesitant to discuss that right now in this particular setting, because
let's take it to closed session.
If someone successfully sues us, I would assume this is would be a civil rights claim, because it's possibly seen as being discriminatory, as you said. What kind of damages
I'm not going to speculate on that.
But people could get damages based on that.
There are damages for fair housing violations, yes. I wouldn't see in this particular type of case.
I would just warn my colleagues that going down the path when you've been warned publicly that enacting this policy could run afoul of fair housing law, for what I see is very little upside, given already the makeup of our wait list being 95% Glendale residents who are going to be applying for this. I just don't see why we would want to go down this path. This makes no sense to me whatsoever.
I just want to address the point that Mr. Ochoa made.
To spend taxpayer money possibly not just defending a lawsuit, but now having the legal staff go and try to do research on this, when we're being told right now that there was case law just set last year, and I remember this case because it was on the front page of the LA Times. So you can see the direction that the Supreme Court of the United States is going, and trying to take us down that same path right now. I just think when we really need to get these units open and occupied for the public who desperately needs housing is not something that I would support.
Ms. Friedman, I assure you that no one's more concerned about those that need low-income housing in Glendale than us. We're the ones whose doors get knocked every day. We're the ones who take dozens of residents begging for help every Tuesday. Councilmember Garpetin already talked about that. We're the ones under pressure. I don't know how many of them you have.
I don't know what you're saying.
No, what I'm saying is, no, I'm not. I am excluding you. I mean, tell us, are they knocking on your door? Are Glendale residents begging you to be helped with low-income housing?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Okay, all right. So they are. No, I do believe that. But I also remember that this project, and I'm trying to think back, may have been before my time, originated either with John Draymond or with you. And I understand that you have some ownership sort of feelings about it. But this is a big deal for us. This is a big deal for our city's residents. We have limited resources. We're trying to make sure that our residents, not to be unfair to anyone else, but our residents are not being treated unfairly on the backside. So that's what's happening here. This isn't, and no one, and you made a statement, you said, to say that we don't want to have the diversity of the surrounding areas. I didn't hear anyone say that. No one said that. Why would we not want to have the diversity of surrounding areas? Just want to make sure that our residents, the ones that vote us in, the ones whose interests we're called to serve according to the democratic system are served also.
I think that artists who are living in the community and people who work in the creative industries are our residents just as much, the same way that veterans are and seniors are. We're talking about serving a subset of our existing population with housing that the YMCA thought was valuable, to include that the state of California chose out of the many, many applications, they only chose a few. And we know for a fact that one of the reasons they gave for funding this project was because it was an artist and creative community designated project. This project very well might not have received financing and might not even be built if it wasn't for that. And this conversation was already had by this council, and a decision was made to go forward. We are not in a position now to go back and change that, because this tax credits were given to us on that basis. And our attorney has told us that by changing the preference, we could be subject to a lawsuit under fair housing law. I don't think it's important enough to possibly violate the law, which is what our attorney is telling us, in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish. We need to act within the confines of the law, which was established for a very good reason, to make sure that our housing is inclusionary, that allows for ethnic and racial diversity in our community, because we are not as diverse as the surrounding community. And those people have every right to also apply to be part of the Glendale community if they are already working here, which is what we're saying, that people who are working in our community and are a part of the community have a right to apply to be living in our community. I think it's time to move on with this project and get these open, rather than take us down the road to a possible lawsuit. We can have this discussion again when we come to 5th and Sonora. We can talk again about whether we want to again reject tax credits from the state and the federal government so that we can have more of an inclusionary housing. I don't know that we'll be in a financial position to do that, but that's our option. I think I agree with Ms. Devine that at this point we should pass this and move on rather than try to get us to attract litigation.
Okay, so we have three options now. One is there's a motion from Ms. Your motion? Whose motion? You made your motion. There's Councilmember Najarian's motion?
I made a substitute motion waiting for a second.
I have one more question before I second your motion, Mr. Mayor. For the city manager. I think we are all on the same page in a way. It's just that this point system it throws me off. I don't think I want to exclude anybody from being able to apply for this housing. And we never said that we want to exclude people who don't live in Glendale or only work in Glendale. What I'm saying is, if we have the discretion of creating a point system, and I don't want to create any issues for the developer or the YMCA especially, because they are our partners. So if we have that discretion to create a point system, why let's say this is the day one, and I was here and I said, Mr. Ochoa, I want to have 2 points for artists, 2 points for Glendale resident, and 1 point for people who work here. Would that be possible, or that would be discrimination again?
Can you repeat it again? I'm sorry.
I think, again, the idea is to have balance in the working and the living. Council has authority to make up its own mind, but that is where our recommendation emanates from. With respect to, you said, does that constitute discrimination? I think Mr. Garcia has been saying the law is unclear. You could be taking risk in going that direction. I think that's all he's saying, and that's all I'm telling you.
In that case, then just if you give 2 points to an artist, whether he or she lives in Glendale or not, that could be discrimination too. I could say I live here and I work here. I'm not an artist. It's discrimination. I think we are going too far down that line, assuming that we're going to get sued, because we don't want to exclude anybody. I don't think we ever personally, nobody has been as vocal as affordable housing, especially for seniors. I want to take that step and say as me, but I may be wrong. But I think if the point system is set up the way that it's the day one, let's say, if we want to make some changes and move forward with this project and see if we can have a consensus for it or not. If we say, this is just an example, 2 points for artists, 2 points for Glendale resident, 1 point for being working in Glendale. And if you're an artist and you work in Glendale, you have more points over than a resident who lives in Glendale and works in Glendale, but is not an artist. You still have that upper hand, basically. So I want to understand if that is possible or not. Yeah. And if there is any consensus on that or not.
So instead of...
say 2 points for artists, 2 points for Glendale resident, and 1 point for
working.
For working in Glendale.
Is that a motion?
Is that a motion? which is
I'd like to hear from our
It's
city
kind of
attorney
like
first.
basically what we have.
Sure, and again,
That's not what-
by providing members of the Housing Authority, by providing a differential between working and living, as we've said, the law is unclear. That's why we've tried to provide that balance. I would suggest to you, if that's your motion and it passes, that the motion include, as Mr. Ochoa said, that we go back, the direction be to go back to talk to Meta and to YMCA, because this is not necessarily a unilateral decision. And then, two, to allow us, our office, to review further the legalities of this from a very simple implementation point. We saw the one-point system as very doable because it's been done in other jurisdictions and is supported by those that have looked at this issue before. So we could go back and look at it. I do know that the cases tend to disfavor the geographic preference by itself because on the grounds that to preserve housing for local residents. The courts have said that's not a sufficient legitimate government purpose to justify the preference on its own. But there might be other bases for us to say it's permissible, such as including local conditions that you have in the particular jurisdiction. That's just something we haven't looked into that fine level of detail. But yeah, to the generic answer, I'm concerned about it, so I can't give you a yes or no.
Yes, Ms. Devine?
And how long would that take? What kind of a time impact would this make on getting people into this housing, getting them chosen? And, if we were talking about 5,000 or 4,000 units, I could see this discussion going on, but it's 44 units. We'll probably get thousands of
69.
applications. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was, the 44 was the veterans. 69 units. We'll be getting thousands of applications, I'm sure. And, out of the 69 for the units, probably the majority of them is going to be our residents. We'll live
That's
here.
the key, the problem.
How do you know that?
I know. It's a
And also the problem is we don't have 4,000 to 5,000 units that we have that. We don't have that luxury. We have such a limited funds to do any project, especially nowadays by the development.
So how long will this delay?
This is not a delay. The project is not done.
Do you need?
I mean,
I couldn't put an estimate on city attorney's ability to research to a point that he feels comfortable in giving that direction, sir. Mike, I don't.
I mean, that, and then also the discussion that we have to have with the other parties.
Okay. How about the May 3rd meeting?
I'd probably shoot for
That's
the
2
May
weeks
10th.
from now.
May 10th?
Okay, May 10th. Let's shoot it. So you don't want us taking vote, right? You want to consult?
Well, I think if the vote is to note and file the report, that's great. If the direction is to at least explore a different preference system, then that direction in the form of a motion would be helpful.
Okay. Well, then we will take them out. So you want us to take a vote? There are two of them.
If the vote is, I would suggest either the vote is to note and file, or the motion is to direct staff to explore a different preference system and perhaps even illuminate that preference system.
My motion's on the table.
Would someone make that second motion? We have the motion note and file, right? That's your motion.
That's out.
I'm sorry, I keep saying that. Paula's motion, Ms. Devine's, Mayor Devine's motion is to note and file.
Correct.
And then we need.
Well, if note and file was just keeping the policy the way it is, I think if that's not what you want to do.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we see? Why don't we take a vote and see?
That's up to the chairperson.
We have a motion
whether to take
and we
that
have
vote.
a second on the motion.
Well, except Mr. Najarian made a substitute motion.
Well, I'll withdraw my original substitute motion and replace it with another substitute motion reflecting the 2-2-1 point system just discussed by Mr. Garpetian.
And it would be, though, to direct us to our office to go review the legal issues associated with that, as well as allow staff to reach out to our partners on the project and discuss the merits and risks.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Let's get the vote on the substitute motion.
Authority members Devine.
The substitute motion.
Ours.
Najarian's
2-2-1.
Devine, yes.
Friedman,
No.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Barazian,
Yes.
Chair Sinanian.
Yes.
And by the way, since we're talking about, and there seems to be an interest to make sure that our affordable housing is as diverse as the surrounding community and our community, why don't we, I don't remember ever seeing an audit of the racial and ethnic diversity in our affordable housing, why don't we go and take a look at the ethnic makeup and the racial makeup of our affordable housing stock and compare it to that of the city of Glendale and the surrounding greater Los Angeles area?
I will not support
certainly
that.
If someone wanted to sue us based on inclusionary grounds, we'd want to be able to show that we're just as inclusionary, since we've taken now state and federal money to allow people to go to be involved in this housing from, from all around the area. So it would be good for us to know.
Rather than doing that, I'd rather us look at this particular issue first and then look at what issues we might have in the future if we're looking at this particular issue. And then staff, if council wants to provide us further direction, I wouldn't want to do that. It's sort of putting the cart before the horse. So I'd rather focus on the issue that council just directed us on. And then if we need to, we can follow up on that issue. I understand where you're coming from, but I'd be hesitant to do it before we resolve these other issues.
Right. Next item.
Move to adjourn.
Authority Chair. Next item is authority member and staff comments. If there are none, it would be a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
And we're adjourned at 4:27.